Good evening. It's time for our week 4 recap. Thank you so much for your participation in class today. It was so fun to see the students so engaged and asking amazing questions. I love that we were able to take the material beyond maybe even what my lesson plan said because of the questions they were asking. It was amazing. I do want to remind you too that this is just really a 4th through 6th grade grammar program, and some students were asking questions well beyond what Essentials covers, which is awesome. Please feel free to dig into resources like Our Mother Tongue, some of the diagramming books that have been recommended, even looking online. And then a reminder too that the way Essentials diagrams might be different than other grammar programs you find. It's perfectly fine. Remember, it's just diagramming gives us a visual of what that sentence is about. It forces us, I think Charlie said today, to look for clarity in our sentences, to make sure there's a subject and a verb. It just really gives the student an opportunity to break that sentence apart and make sure that it truly is a sentence, to understand what all the pieces of the sentence are doing, all the parts of speech. I wanted to remind you that in chart A, we have just the list right here of the sentence patterns and the examples of how to diagram those. And so this is a wonderful way to go back. Remember, we talked about the flatlands are in every single pattern. And then also we have the great divide that divides the subject with the verb. And you're going to find that in every single pattern. That's going to be the most essential part. It's what we always diagram first. And then we take it from there. We add the modifiers, perhaps other extensions of the sentence like direct objects as we get there, predicate nominatives, and so forth. So that special section from week 3, make sure you take a look at that if you have further questions about diagramming, and again, use other resources as your students ask amazing questions. It's so fun to extend their learning that way. Today we focused on a couple of different charts. The first one was chart F, and that is the pronoun chart. And as I mentioned in class, the great thing about the pronoun chart is this is our foundations memory work in English for the next several weeks. Students are going to be taking one column at a time, and they're going to be memorizing the different pronouns. And as I mentioned, right here going across in italics, these tell you what noun usages can be replaced with which pronouns. So for example, the nominative pronouns will be used as the subject of a sentence, or when your sentence has a predicate nominative, you would replace them with these pronouns. If you have a noun that's a direct object, an object of the preposition, or an indirect object, you would use these pronouns. Again, going across the bottom, you have these tester sentences, and it's a great way to just help your students understand, like, oh yeah, that wouldn't sound correct if I use the wrong pronoun in the wrong place in the sentence. So you can just play with language that way to help them understand. And then at the bottom, we have other pronouns. These in the grid at the top are considered your personal pronouns. Down here is when we're referring to things usually. And so besides the interrogative pronouns and the relative pronouns, those actually also refer to people. But with your demonstrative pronouns and indefinite pronouns, those are just other pronouns. They take the place of nouns, and we use them constantly. Perhaps we just haven't before talked about them as pronouns. And we do that in Essentials so that we can parse those sentences and recognize them as the part of speech called a pronoun. Also, we talked about interjections. Interjections are just this very, very small chart here at the top of, I don't know why mine isn't labeled, so I'm not sure what the chart number is, or chart letter is, but interjections, really you want to focus on the definition of an interjection, understanding that it can be one word or a phrase, so that's a group of words. And when we diagram it, it goes on that hoverboard above the sentence because it's not grammatically connected to the sentence, which just means I can take it away and the meaning of my sentence doesn't change. It just gives more excitement, more emotion to the sentence. But if I take it away, the meaning of the sentence doesn't change at all. And we talked about different ways to punctuate those. They can have exclamation marks or commas. It just depends on what I want to convey to the reader. We never take the punctuation into our diagramming, so that's something to remember, but we always bring over the capitalization. And so those are just some great reminders about diagramming. And again, I would refer you to that special section from week 3 for further information on that. Again, when you're looking at your EEL guide, you want to go to the at home section, and that will help you understand what to do at home. Remember that we moved that pronoun chart from week 3 to week 4, so you want to focus on that this week. Also interjections. And when you're doing your analytical task sheets, we're going to go starting with task 1, moving all the way to 4. We didn't have time to do those in class today, to do another example of an analytical task sheet, but make sure that you're doing those at home. And you're going to choose the sentence which best works for your students. So remember, sentences 1 through 3 are the more simplified sentences. If your student is ready for a challenge, you want to focus them more probably on sentences 3 through 5. Those students that are ready, please go ahead and go to task 5 and to task 6, the quid et quo. That really helps solidify everything that they're learning. In math today, we had a fun game of number knockout. We talked about exponents. We talked about how to use the secret exponent of 0. And I even confessed I don't completely understand that. I'm waiting for someone to explain it to me. So please, someone watch some videos and see if you can understand why it is when we put a number with the exponent of 0, it equals 1. I'd really like to understand that. We did try to clear the board, and so we had the numbers 5, 5, and 6, and then we still were trying to knock out 13, 15, 17, 22, and 28. So I'd love to hear from your students this week. You can send me an email, and I'd love to see their equations and how they knock out those numbers, and we'll share those. Your students earned a popcorn party. That's really awesome because of all the charts that they've memorized and all the papers they've written. And so next week we will have a popcorn party in class. We'll probably do that maybe during math time, not sure. I'll work through that, but we'll bring popcorn and let them snack on that as a celebration. Also, our password, I forgot to put that in our video this week, so I want to make sure I take care of that. So next week our password will be, what is a noun? So hopefully you're noticing that we are using passwords that reflect back on a week or two back, so that students are taking responsibility for doing their memory work. So that's one of the goals of those passwords. It's just a fun way for them to do that. We continued in IEW with Unit 3, Retelling Narrative Stories. This week it's on Augustine and goes to Britain. And that's a really fun story. And I told you I'd look up that book that I mentioned, and I will make sure and put that in the email, the title of the book that I have read to my kids before that I really enjoy about Augustine. And so this is lesson 6. We added the dress up for strong verbs. We talked about strong verbs versus boring verbs, how a strong verb will clearly help your reader picture what is happening in each sentence. Every sentence has a verb, and so every sentence can have a strong verb. But for now, we are banning go and went and say and said. We're encouraging your student to use words other than go and went and say and said. And as always, IEW equips us for the things they ask us to do. And so as I mentioned in class, in your SRP on page 100 and 101 are lists of words, excuse me just a minute, my pages are stuck together, that will replace, look at this. They have so many choices, and it's very fun. And I love to see the students light up. They were having so much fun today, just coming up with different ways to say said. And it really does make their writing more intriguing, more interesting, and it gives that style again. Even though we're all writing on the same story, it gives them an opportunity to make that story their own. So continue adding ly words, continue with your who, which clauses. Now we're going to focus on strong verbs. Remember, you can also throw in alliteration or any other dress-ups that your student remembers from last year. Don't feel like you have to squelch anything that might be bubbling up. Oh, I remember this, a because clause, or I remember a prepositional opener. By all means, have them do that. Add that to the checklist. Whatever you want to add and have them responsible for, you are free to do that. I think that pretty much sums up our week. Thank you again for being an awesome class. I look forward to seeing you next week. We'll do week 5, and then we actually have a break week after that. So it's a perfect week for a popcorn party. Remember, the password is what is a noun. Have a great week, and let me know if you have any questions.